The rifts within Israel's ruling coalition grow wider, as does the gap between Israel's prime minister and just about everyone. We'll talk about one of those tensions with a woman who is a leading light in Israel's ultra-orthodox community. It's Unholy. I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in London.
And I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv. Unholy, two Jews on the news. At least one of these Jews has some news, right? Because Jonathan needs to write his, 37th book. I've lost count. And he might be leaving us for a few weeks in July because he has strange priorities. And I'm here to tell you, listeners, that I am not going anywhere. And in fact, we will have a line of brilliant, acclaimed, wonderful guest co-hosts. They are all aligned. I might like this too much, Jonathan. I'd be careful if I.
Yeah, I was worrying there a little bit with the go easy on the brilliant, the wonderful, etc. Don't get too comfortable.
People I absolutely love and have a fun time talking to.
Yeah, it's getting awkward already. No, this is why people in broadcasting in particular never ever go away. You may have noticed this, viewers and listeners. They sit in that chair because they worry if ever they were to vacate that chair, someone else will sit in there. And the audience will go, yeah, that woman is great. Why do we need the other one? So it took some persuasion on my part to agree to let myself do this. But I think it's necessary because otherwise that book is not going to write itself. And yeah, with the handy timing of a UK general election thrown in, it sort of forced my hand. So yeah, that's just it's not going to be the whole of July. It's just going to be some portion of July. I will miss being in this chair, but no, we have some brilliant people who have stepped up to the plate.
Exactly. And you know what I say, I always tell you, there's no I in unholy. So you go do your thing and let's see. You know what I'm saying? Like, you rolled the dice and let's see where it lands.
Don't like the sound of let's see. That's sinister and chilling.
That's what I wanted. I like that message is cut across. So as long as you are here, let's talk about what's going on.
Well, a fair old amount, more internal than external, I would say. I mean, we're in one of those periods where actually, the big news, the foreign news doesn't lead with Israel every day. In fact, lots of attention on images coming out of Pyongyang, where Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un had a tete-a-tete, one of those big sort of pageant procession motorcade things. In Pyongyang, it's a very retro set of images we got. I noticed one very close North Korea watcher was observing how these pictures came out in real time and that they were seeing images of the North Korean capital kind of live and saying, it's unbelievably rare that ever happens. Normally you only see pictures, even news footage, days later, and how this was very rare. Anyway, is it wrong for me to admit that I felt a kind of relief that it wasn't Israel that was in the news just for a few hours as people were paying attention instead to that visit?
I was actually fascinated by that visit in all kinds of ways. First of all, Putin really likes it when other people wait for him, right? He's always late for these things. Yeah. And also that kind of, they're driving the car, that huge black car together, and the presents, the gift giving, everything is bugged, like everything is bugged that they're giving. Even the dogs that Putin got from North Korea, they are bugged. So yeah, it's the evil league of evil. Sorry to say that way, but that's to be blunt about it. And it's I think it was a fascinating visit.
It was the whole retro kitsch of it as well. That you go past the chorus or sort of prearranged, geometrically arranged crowd of children waving little sort of pom-poms and flags in unison. It is something out of a little bit of a kind of Dr. Evil Austin Powers movie. But yeah, no, the whole gathering is worth reminding ourselves. These are two people. One presides over a slave state, and the other is, a dictator in all but name. So that is that little bit of diversion away from our usual patch. But internally, it's a whole lot going on. I mean, I met someone this week very closely involved in sort of domestic Israeli politics as a sort of activist, follows it very closely, was talking about the coalition and said, there's blood in the water. He can sort of smell something going on, he said, as if a scenario that I myself had thought was more remote, namely that this thing cracks up in the course of July, is becoming more and more plausible, parenthesis. Maybe then I would come back if that happens. Close brackets. So, there is movement going on in Israel's coalition.
Oh, yes. I mean, look, we are 285 days into this war, 8.5 months since the biggest catastrophe in Israel's history. And what might topple Netanyahu's government is not that failure, not the civilian deaths, not the hostages, not all of that, but rather the rift with the ultra-orthodox over the draft bill. Now, obviously, everything here is happening under the shadow of the war, but this is what could happen. Now, we have been spending a few weeks talking about this on Unholy. What happened this week was that the deliberations on the about the draft bill that essentially exempts ultra-Orthodox from serving in the military, that has begun, the ball has begun to roll in the Knesset relevant committee. And also what you're seeing is a few members of Knesset from the Likud, most prominent of them being Nir Barkat, saying, we won't be able to support this draft bill if it moves forward the way that the coalition wants to push it forward. All this is pretty dramatic. And remember, we are still waiting for the decision that the High Court of Justice needs to come with in the next couple of days, really. And that will be a dramatic question. What will the Supreme Court judges decide? Remember, the law that was in place expired. The government is starting to write a new law, but that is stuck because of all kinds of arguments inside the coalition. And if there is no agreement on that, the Supreme Court can decide all kinds of things, like you need to conscript these Orthodox who have been exempt so far, or you will not have your institutions budgeted. So all this is a huge deal, and we are still waiting for that to move. As you say, July is the end of, and we've said this more than once, the end of the Knesset session. So essentially, it's very difficult to vote the government out of power if the Knesset indeed reaches the end of the summer session, July 28th. It's going to be a little bit sooner than that because Netanyahu is slated to speak in front of Congress on July 24th. So that is going to be something that's going to get a lot of attention outside Israel and inside Israel as well.
So for a long time, we were talking about what might crack this coalition up. And you mentioned all these huge issues, war and hostages that have not cracked open the coalition. But in a way, the notion of Nir Barkat and other figures associated with, the right, these people are not sort of, soft in any way. But there are people in Likud, the ranks of the Likud, who do have a constituency of people who are resentful and angry about the ultra-Orthodox being exempt from military service. They are getting some heat from their own base on that issue. And you saw it with a handful of individuals speaking out about this. Even, an interesting cleavage, an interesting divide between religious Zionism and ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties, very often lumped together by outsiders to talk about the religious parties. There's a world of difference between those sort of settler parties on the right and ultra-Orthodox parties. We get into some of that with our guest, actually, about the roots of that, almost theologically. But there is a group of people, and it's not only secular Israelis, who are resentful of this one group of people who are exempt from sharing the burden, carrying on their shoulders the burden everyone else carries. And they will be, it's fascinating to know how practical this has been. Are they getting, is the switchboard jammed? Are they getting bombarded with emails from voters telling them, you can't let them get away with this much longer. We're in a state of war. And could that be, as you've been raising, the pressure point that finally cracks particularly the ranks of the Likud?
That's the big question. You see this sort of beginning or these signs of unraveling. Now, this wasn't the only bill, a controversial bill that was discussed in the Knesset this week. This is all connected. Aryeh Deri, the chair of the Shas ultra-Orthodox party, wanted to bring a law. It's called the Rabbi's Law. We should explain it's a law that's intended to give the government and not the municipalities control over appointing rabbis in these cities and municipalities. So essentially, it's not only government domination over religious observance, it's also the fact that the government has many more rabbis that it can appoint. Now, you had this situation in which you had heads of mayors of cities that are either targeted by Hamas or either targeted by Hezbollah, some of them from the Likud, coming to the Knesset this week and saying, why is this what you're focusing on now? Why is your efforts and your funding, all of that, put on this when it should be put on other important things that have to do with protecting Israel? Aryeh Deri trying to push this forward. Itamar Ben-Gvir, seeing the opportunity, right? Ever the opportunist saying, wait a minute, I want to be part of the war cabinet. You have prevented me from doing this. I'm not going to vote for this law if you're not going to put me in this sort of top war cabinet. Netanyahu realizing that might not be a very good idea and having to pull the whole law and move backwards with this. So showing that he is weak, Deri not showing himself as a very strong man, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, on the other hand, indeed, coming out semi-victorious in this.
Yeah, it's a classic case of patronage and how that can be, resented by those people who don't have it, but also it's exactly the sort of thing people fight over. And I think you can see how a big chunk of Israeli population recoils from seeing at a time of war exactly what you said about priorities. When their own sons and daughters are in harm's way, they see the rabbis who are, exempt from their people, their children and grandsons and granddaughters, exempt from military service, having an argument about patronage and jobs for the boys, because that's literally what this would be, jobs for their own people with salaries attached. And that is always going to, prompt and trigger resentment. So we talked at the top about how there are rifts all across. This is obviously one between Netanyahu and the Orthodox within his ultra-Orthodox within his own coalition. But I was interested because in some ways it's been bubbling on all the way through since October the 7th, this rift between him and his military. We know of the underlying rift they're partly made vivid by Netanyahu's efforts to blame them, to dump the blame for October the 7th on them, and doing it not subtly from the start. But just a couple of overt moments. I mean, there's just one I'll mention, and then I know that there's one that's happened more recently. This announcement by the IDF of that there were tactical pauses in Gaza. That was the phrase used. Lots of people abroad, Israel's allies, saying, good, that's exactly what we've been asking for. Period of hours in the day from morning, I think, until 7 p.m. in the evening, that would allow, easier passage of humanitarian aid in and allow aid organizations to start planning because they know there is this pause. And then a statement from the prime minister essentially denouncing these tactical pauses and saying, nothing to do with me, which is, striking. Let's put it mildly.
What essentially happened here is that Netanyahu gave the order and said, we need to do this, right? The Americans are pressuring us. There's also internal pressure. We need to give that, as you say, tactical pauses for humanitarian aid. So the decision had to do with Kerem Shalom and the sort of route the army is taking and what times the army won't be active. Now, when this came out and was published, you suddenly had a lot of pressure on Netanyahu from the extreme right, and Netanyahu and Gallant saying, as you quoted, no, we had nothing to do with this. Now, they could essentially say, we gave a general order, we didn't know what the specifics are. But I mean, obviously, this sheds a light of how all of this has been happening. And of course, when you zoom out and you see what happened this week, it seems like the rift is growing deeper between Netanyahu and his top military brass. On the one hand, you have Netanyahu's, let's say, acolytes and family blaming again and again the military, including Netanyahu's son, pointing out what did the head of the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, do on October 7th, as if sort of, brewing this conspiracy about the military and was anyone working from within with Hamas. This has been sort of the kind of deep state conspiracy that the extreme right has been voicing since October 7th. And you've had other of Netanyahu's acolytes specifically targeting Herzi Halevi. On the other hand, you have Herzi Halevi himself, quotes coming out of his skirmishes. You feel him being a little less restrained with ministers from the extreme right like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. And the height of all this is Daniel Hagari, the spokesperson for the military, yesterday in an interview saying, this business, this is his quote, this business of saying Hamas will disappear is throwing sand in the eyes of Israelis. Now, that is a big deal, right? That the head of the military spokesperson's unit is saying that. Essentially, the subtext is, whoever's saying that to you, Israelis, is lying. So that is a very dramatic rift here. What is happening here, Jonathan? What is happening is that the war in Rafah is, about to end. It's going to take a week, 2 or 3, but where is this heading? And the military has been essentially begging the prime minister, have a strategy. Tell us where this is going. We can't go on forever with this war in Gaza. And that is why you're seeing everything brewing up right now.
Yeah, I think and just to add to the list of groups or people that the prime minister is at odds with, we can throw in the public. Those street protests are getting bigger. They haven't yet reached the heights they did about the judicial coup in the middle of 2023, but they've gone from the sort of low tens of thousands to much larger than that. I think last weekend was the biggest so far. That is another straw in the wind. And also, again, bubbling under as a tension between Netanyahu and the United States. I mean, you mentioned that date in the diary that he is going to speak in Washington. That used to be a kind of routine matter where the Israeli prime minister would be invited to Washington. Now it's a partisan matter where it is the Republicans who've invited him to address a Republican-led the House of Representatives. The invitation comes from the Republican Speaker. This is a trick, by the way. We will remember he's done this before when he came to speak about Iran and against the nuclear deal in defiance of the Obama White House at the invitation of John Boehner, then the Speaker of the House. It is one of the lasting achievements, and I put achievements in very sarcastic air quotes, of Netanyahu to turn what had been an American consensus issue into a partisan issue where, if you're a Republican, you side with Israel. If you're a Democrat, as a la Facebook status, it's complicated. And that is something that was not the case about American politics in the pre-Netanyahu era. It's really something that he has done in the last 15. And it's as if he's doubling down on it with this speech, as if to emphasize that more tension with the Biden administration very directly this week.
I believe Senator Chuck Schumer has also signed on that invitation, but it's definitely coming from the initiative is, of course, the Republican side. There will be, I assume, a meeting with the president just because they won't ignore the fact that the Israeli prime minister is there. But the Democrats don't like that. They don't like the fact that Netanyahu will come to speak. It is obviously a very big moment for Netanyahu. That always goes down well with the Israeli public, that he's standing in front of the American Congress. That will give him a few points that he needs. As we said, he is attempting to stagger on as best of his ability until the end of July. If he manages to do that, it just means that the whole crisis is being postponed to October. It doesn't mean it's going away. It really isn't, but it just means it's giving him another few months, which is the way that he runs things, really. Just kick the can down the road, survive another day. That is his modus operandi.
And this all absolutely came to a head this week with the White House cancelling a planned meeting with Israeli officials on the Iran question, all coming after Netanyahu had accused the US of withholding weapons, saying it was inconceivable that in the past few months the administration has been withholding weapons to Israel. I said it in a video, which is becoming his default mode of communication, and widely reported that Biden's team were furious with Netanyahu for, making this sort of public statement, and they shot back themselves.
We should say that the administration was shocked by Netanyahu's words, and you had Blinken, Secretary of State, coming out saying, we are moving with our assistance as it normally would, aside from one delayed shipment of bombs. This has been a discussion for a while. And you had the spokesperson for the White House saying, we honestly don't know what Netanyahu is talking about. And again, there was a question also here in Israel. Why say this now? Why say it like this? The conversations about this one shipment have been going on for a long time. The Biden administration in May authorized $3 billion in assistance to Israel. The answer to that is, of course, internal, mainly, which is Netanyahu trying to divert attention from his coalition woes. There are others that are saying that Netanyahu is, especially the military, very concerned about that specific shipment. But these things usually resolve themselves behind closed doors. And there are many who think that, particularly in the defense echelon, who think that this isn't something that you should air out publicly in this manner.
Yeah, it is as if he is absolutely going out of his way to make sure that this relationship is as rocky and difficult as it could possibly be. And as always, to get himself out of a political hole. Meanwhile, because we're talking about the United States, a lot of attention around the Jewish world, I think, to a report that has come out from the Columbia University Task Force on Anti-Semitism. Now, Columbia has been, and a lot of the Ivy League colleges have been in people's minds for several months because of the protests, the Gaza protests on America's campuses. But we remember those university heads hauled before Congress, giving what were seen as inadequate answers about anti-Semitism on campus. So Columbia has a task force on anti-Semitism. Even that itself has been not without controversy, but some reports coming out of there already and some particular incidents. According to the task force, one professor encountering a Jewish-sounding surname while reading names before an exam asked the student to explain their views on the Israeli government's actions in Gaza. Another told their class to avoid reading mainstream media, declaring that it is owned by Jews. And in a separate episode, a student had made a complaint about an offensive comment relating to Jews, and the recipient of the complaint dealt with it by publicly displaying their email to fellow students. This was correspondence the student had offered in private. It was shown in front of all the other students. So it does point to some kind of culture there, a phenomenon that goes wider than just what we saw in those protests this summer.
Yeah, as usual, a bit of a history being the understatement. This is a very disturbing report to read, and it shows that exactly what you're saying, that deep undercurrent that we were sort of unaware of and now has exploded, sadly, not only at Columbia. And it means that there is, this has to be solved on so many levels and dealt with seriously in so many ways. I spoke to a Jewish community leader a few weeks ago, and she said to me, did you know that there were 170 organizations in the US dealing with anti-Semitism? That is a lot. And what you need maybe is a consolidation of it, or somehow something that would work and understand that this has been going on under the radar for a very long time. And it's going to have to be solved in a very deep way. We had a conversation, an episode a few weeks back called College Break. We talked to two students, one of them at Columbia. It's just something that you feel like has to be dealt with as urgently as possible.
Now, we began at the top of the episode talking about the rifts that are widening in the coalition, particularly over this issue of conscription and the exemption for military conscription that has been available for many decades to the Haredi, the ultra-orthodox. So often it is the case, and we've been doing it, and everybody does it, of speaking about the Haredi as a separate sort of sector within Israeli and Jewish life. What happens much more rarely is to speak with members of that community. And that's something we've been long wanting to put right. We've done it a couple of times here, but we thought it was timely to do that.
Rivka Ravitz is a prominent figure in the ultra-orthodox community in Israel. She served as the chief of staff to the 10th president, Reuven Rivlin. Her father-in-law is Israeli politician Avraham Ravitz, who was an MK from United Torah Judaism. Her husband is the mayor of the Haredi municipality of Kiryat Yearim, and she is currently the chief of staff for the new mayor of Bet Shemesh, also working on a doctorate in public policy at the University of Haifa, all the while raising 12 children and 9 grandchildren. Rivka, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I mean, look, there's so much to go through, but first you're going to have to explain how on earth you do all those high-powered jobs with 12 kids. Give us the recipe. I'm confused with 3, so you're going to have to, walk me through this.
The only recipe is a good husband. A helpful one.
That's very good. That's very good. Okay, I got that. Check. So we can move on. Okay.
Yeah, all those work-life balance conversations, they are thrown slightly into relief by that. Rivka, you know that we're so keen to hear from you because, as Yonit and I were saying before, people talk a lot about the Haredi community and they don't often talk with them and hear from them directly. But that is particularly the case, I think, now where this issue that has become front and center in Israeli politics is about the exemption, a historic exemption applicable to the ultra-orthodox community from military service. And just reminder, all our listeners know that it's compulsory in Israel for every 18-year-old, but there is this exemption for the community that you're part of. Just explain to us why it is so important. I mean, something that the community will really go to extreme lengths to protect for them, for their young men and women, not to do what everyone else in Israel does, which is military service.
Okay, so, you say sometimes you call it a point of view. Why do you call it a point of view? Because when you look at the world, and if I stand on one mountain and you stand on another mountain, we'll see a different world. So if someone wants to understand the importance of this issue to the Haredi community, one will have to go down his mountain and try to come up to mine and just understand the importance of the Torah studying for the Haredi community. We, around the world, we are about 15 million Jews. I don't know if you go according to Pew or according to, but it's between 15 million Jews and 18 million Jews. And just 70,000 of them sit here in Israel and study Torah. We as Haredi Jews, we really believe that God built this world for studying Torah. And that's the real duty he wants us to fulfill here. So that's the way we were raised up from birth. And I remember my mother putting a large sign on the door of my father's room. You should be quiet. Abba, Tati, Dad is learning Torah now. So no, we just grew into it, and we really believe in that. So that's the point of view. And if one would not get down of his mountain and come and see my mountain, it will be a problem. So it starts from there. And Torah studying, okay, especially Talmud, is very complicated. As Yonit said, I learned computing, and my degrees are in computer science. It's a thing that if you don't devote your life into it, you can't get it. You could try, you could go around it, you could could understand some of it, but it's not the real thing if you don't just leave everything and get into it. So that's the two things you have to understand before we start explaining anything else. So the Haredi community heads, like the rabbis and even the politicians, really put this issue and on top of the list of the things that are important for them, and that's the background of it.
So you say you need to, and I love that image, you need to go down your mountain and come up to mine to see it from my point of view. But if we walk back down to the other part of Israeli society and to their mountain, and what they're saying is, look, when Ben Gurion set this exemption, there were a few hundreds studying Torah. Now, in 2023, there was an exemption to 63,000. The military, which is now deep in a war that we don't know the end of, and we don't see the end of, is saying we need thousands of people from the Haredi community to enlist. Is there any chance of that happening? I mean, even the hypothetical, rabbis saying, you know what, let's do that. Is that an option at all?
So now we have to go a little bit into politics, even though I don't like politics. As a Haredi mother, even though I don't have boys at the right age, but we are a large family, as you said, 12 children, and my husband's side, and I'm one of 10, and it's about 200 cousins. In those 200 Haredi cousins, I do have 4 cousins that did go to the Haredi units in the army, and all of them came back home without their kippah and having nothing to do anymore with religion. And as a mother, I look at it and I get scared. You know what's the word Haredi? Haredi is scared. Mm-hmm. yeah, we are scared. And mothers and fathers got scared, and they said, if my son goes to if I could ask you, I know that you are interviewing me, but if I could ask you, do you think that we have the right to stay Haredi?
Of course.
I think everyone believes that we have the right to stay Haredi and to keep our lives as Haredim. And let's say we would like to send out our children to the army, maybe, but we really are scared, even maybe you could say terrified. Haredi is like the word between scared and terrified of our children leaving our tradition, going out of our world, stepping out and getting secular. And that's one point. Behind of the point that I explained, that learning Torah, learning Talmud especially, is a very hard. You have to put your life into it. You know that the children, even they start learning Talmud when they are 13. They go out of home at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they come back home around 9 or 10 in the evening. They have just 2 breaks of an hour all the day long. They really sit into it. They tear. They put all of them have glasses, because they're like reading the text all the day long and going in very deep. So, and it's no vacation, it's not easy. No one decided not to go to stay and learn Torah because they wanted vacation from the army or something like that. That's not the issue.
So this is extremely helpful, I think, for people who don't understand this world. And we talk about this image of the mountain. I feel as if I'm somewhere between these mountains. This is the world I live in here. I live in the Haredi neighborhood in London, but it's also the world my mother was raised in. She was, the daughter of a Haredi family. And so I know something of what you're talking about, and the children who are studying all the hours, I see that around me. What I wonder is if there isn't contained in what you've said some kind of solution that's possible, because if the fear, and I think you were very honest about that, is of, in effect, assimilation into the secular world, is there not a solution which does allow Haredim to serve with other Haredim in units that respect and honor that? That's one thing. And second, your point about study and how important that is, and the need for there to be, and I think a lot of people listening to this do like the idea that there is a group of people who are keepers of the flame, who are still learning these texts. But does that have to be for an entire life? Or could it not be that the child who learns at 13 keeps doing that till 18, they then do 2 or 3 years of service, could be national service, not necessarily even taking up arms, and then comes back to a life of Talmud study? Again, I see that around me. So I'm just thinking, contained in what you say, if there are not pragmatic compromises, solutions that would allow you to protect the way of life, not for those children and grandchildren to become secular, and still for your community to do its bit.
So to your first question, I think there is a solution. We could find a solution. The big debate is about the Haredim not wanting to serve, being selfish and seeing everyone else serving and just sit down on your chair and in the air conditioner and read something. So that's not the reality. People want to serve. And if you go into Haredi community, you see Zaka, Hatzalah, you see they like to help, they like to serve. But as I said,
we should just explain for people who don't know those terms. Those are the groups of people who do, paramedics in Hatzalah, and then Zaka are the people who do this incredible work, which is after there's been a terrorist action, finding the body parts, which is, so that a full Jewish burial is possible. I just wanted to explain those terms.
Good. So you have to know that there are this big percentage of Haredim, especially men, but also women, that do go to these to Hatzalah and to Yedidim and Zaka and all of these. So it's not the point of just wanting to be selfish and not helping and not giving your part and things like that. As I said, we are scared of sending our children to the army. So I think the solution could come from other places like police, like, as we said, all those organizations that could take those boys into their organization, and they could serve there, and they could help. They could be a big help without touching the hot potato of going to the IDF or not going to the IDF. I think it could be a solution. To your second question, as I said, I don't think, and that's how we were raising up. A Torah, and especially Talmud, is a text that you have to devote your life to.
I want to ask just on a personal level, because you're very much immersed, not only in your own community, but also in the secular community. You know many people, you have so many contacts. What are these conversations? I mean, Israel is in a war for 8.5 months. I'm sure you've had these conversations with other mothers whose sons are in, combat units. Can you tell us a little bit about those kinds of conversations?
Yeah. So that's it's not easy. It's really not comfortable for me. As a mother, talking to friends of mine, and I have friends all around the society, and sometimes I feel terrible. I really feel terrible. Like, what could I answer her? I can't tell her, get down off your mountain, when I talk to a mother that can't sleep in the night because her son is in Gaza or in Rafah or something like that. I can't tell her that. I can't explain her anything. She can't understand it. She's really scared, and she really doesn't sleep for the right reasons. And so sometimes I really it's like terrible for us. It's not easy. Saying that, it doesn't change my mind, thinking that if God built this world for learning His Torah, and as I said, there's discussions. We talk one to each other as mothers to boys that are in the age of going to the army or soon growing to the age, and these conversations are really not easy for us. We are speechless. We don't have what to answer even to ourselves.
So that, I think, again, that's really honest to say that. And just a thought that comes to me. The first is about the Torah itself says, and what religious Judaism says. It's not, as I understand it, a pacifist faith. It doesn't ban Jews from taking up arms. There's no, objection on that ground. And then, again, I do, from people steeped in the community who grew up in it, tell me that it is actually a relatively new idea, that everyone must study. That back in the day, not even that long ago, I think before the war, the Second World War, the assumption was only actually very exceptional scholars would be the ones who would dedicate a lifetime to study in the way you've been describing. And then other people would do regular jobs. It's quite a new thing, as I understand it, in the Haredi world, that every man of that age should be studying. And I just put those two things together and think, again, when you say that you'll sometimes find yourself speechless with those other mothers, is there not a way through here which says, within the parameters of religious Haredi tradition, that people can do military service without it breaking some timeless prohibition within Haredi Judaism?
So as you said, there's it's not a problem going to the army. King David had an army, and King Solomon too, and that's not the problem. The problem is not going into a war. If we need, we could fight, and the Bible is full of Jews fighting. That's not the issue. The issue is as I told you, as a mother, when I saw my cousins going into the army and coming back home without their kippah and having nothing to do with the religion, nothing to do with Shabbos, nothing to do with being frum. So we just got scared. And there's a lot of young men in the Haredi community that would be very happy to serve the country through other organizations, if it's police, if it's giving organizations, as we said. So there are some ideas to solve this, but the moment it became a political issue, mm-hmm. and there are two sides in the Israeli politics that earn from this big debate. So I'm not sure if the right yard where we will solve it is in the Knesset. I'm not sure that's the place where it will be solved.
So let's focus on that. You said you don't like politics, but you're very good at it. Your understanding of it is very deep. Can this be the issue? Can this draft bill and the arguments surrounding it, can this be the thing that topples Netanyahu's government, in your view?
I think it may go to that place. Mm-hmm. I'm even scared it may go to that place because we are in the middle of war. I'm not sure that elections now is the right idea for us, but I don't see it getting solved in a law and then again going to courts and then coming back to the Knesset. And what would be the end? It's like a deadlock. There's no end to this story. So I'm not sure. And you know, it as I said, it could be solved, but someone and it's not only one side. I don't blame just one side of the politic map. There are two sides to of politicians that earned something from this big fight. And I'm not sure they would give us up this fight. I don't know.
Can you just sort of elaborate on who are the sides and what are they earning for someone, you know, listening from the outside?
It's also the Haredi politicians and also the, those like Yair Lapid, as not his using him as a name, using him as a symbol to politicians that earned something from this big fight. So I'm not sure he would let it get solved in a law, and I'm not sure that the Haredi side would like a law. You know, the law that they are fighting on it now, Yair Lapid brought, and I'm not sure if it was 2 or 4 years ago, and Gafni was against. So it's like crazy.
Because there are some people who think that actually if it was a different government, the government that fell, the government of Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, actually this could have been solved. That this is, as I was sort of hinting earlier, this is in the realm of the soluble. You know, this can be done. Is that your view too, that actually if it wasn't this government with its constellation of forces, but a different government, maybe even, you know, those parties who are avowedly, you know, secular and liberal, that they actually may be able to solve this problem?
I could hear this, and I believe so. It could happen because, as I said, this law Yair Lapid himself brought up to the Knesset when he was I don't know if he was a minister or a prime minister. Maybe this is the only solution to this deadlock. Mm-hmm. If this government will go to elections and will have a different government, and they will bring up a draft, maybe that would work. Could be.
I'm curious, you said there are two sides that, see this maybe as a bit of an advantage or set to gain from this fight. Mm-hmm. So what are the Haredim, the ultra-orthodox parties? What can they gain from this argument, in your opinion?
The same as the parties on the other side gain, just voters, more and more voters.
Which is what politicians want.
Very simple.
I kind of want to zoom out, if we may, because, I mean, you are, this, I think, a symbol for the community, but also still an outlier. I mean, a woman who has a career like yours, raising 12 children. Talk to me a little bit about the changes in the Haredi community about, vis-a-vis women's, like you, and that kind of movement towards more and more women in these kinds of positions. Is that where it's going? I guess what I'm heading with this question is, are we at some point in our lives going to see an ultra-Orthodox MK in the Knesset from one of the ultra-Orthodox parties?
I'll tell you, there's a big change in the workforce. You see
a female MK, of course.
A lot of Haredi women in the workforce in Israel. A lot of them, more than 80% of them are working, and some of them are gaining good jobs. High jobs even. Not a lot of them, not in big numbers, but you could start and see that. About having a member of Knesset, I'm not sure it will happen in the coming years, but it will happen. It will take some time, maybe 10 years, maybe 15. I believe we will see a Haredi member of Knesset because it can't be else. Yeah, can't. We need them there, but it will take time, as other things in the Haredi community take times, sometimes years, and then it happens.
And just tell us about these changes, even beyond the realm of politics and sort of formal politics. Just what is going on, again, because as we said, openly from the top, people often talk about this community but don't speak with them. It's fascinating just to hear you speak about it. Women are studying. You talk to us about your degrees that you're studying at university and so on. What impact that is having on the way of life? I mean, for example, on the men. I mean, when women like you are working and studying, does that mean some of the men are taking on some of the traditionally domestic duties that they may not have done before in the home, whether that's childcare or cooking and so on? What's happening inside the Haredi life that people like me and Yonit might not see?
So this big change of Haredi women going out to work brings changes. If I go out in my neighborhood at 8:00 in the morning, I mainly see fathers taking the children to school and to kindergarten because the mothers start working very early. They start working at 6:00 in the morning. Most of them are working in computing and things like that, and they need to work 8 hours, and they want to be back at 3:00 to take the children out of kindergarten for the fathers staying to learn in yeshiva. So that way of that style of life that the men devote their lives for Torah, and women work and earn the money for living. So they have to help a lot. And if I go to the grocery, most of the people there are men because they help their wives because they go out to work. So it's a cycle. In the community that I live in, the value of learning Torah and devoting the life for learning Torah is very high, really very high. Women are willing to do everything for their husband to stay in yeshiva.
Just so we give the statistics in the general population in Israel and the workforce, so it's 87 men, 87%, women are 83.4. In the Haredi community, it's about 55% men and 80% women. Just so we know the sort of the difference here in the proportion of what you're describing. Yeah. And obviously, there's also been a very vast discussion in Israeli society about Haredi men being more an active part of the workforce. We should explain maybe to listeners outside that up to the age of 26, essentially, you can study Torah and be exempt from military service. After the age of 26, you don't need, quote unquote, need to study Torah. You can go out and work. How do you see that men being a bigger part of the workforce in the Haredi community in the future? Is that going to happen, of the general workforce, I mean?
Yes. The changes at the law that let men to go out and work without being forced go to the army first. So that changed a lot. You see the percentage goes up. I see around me, I don't know the numbers, but I see around me those that can't sit and learn 13 hours a day. They just go out to work. Not all of them get good jobs, but they try to.
That's because of the core studies. So that has to somehow change as well, doesn't it, in a way?
So that's one of the issues. Yes, it's not easy for someone who didn't study math and English and computing, going right into the Israeli workforce. So it's one of the issues. It's not only that, but yes, that's one of the problems.
I mean, it's complicated, this, isn't it? Because earlier you were saying part of the point why they can't do 3 years military service is because it's a lifetime of studying Torah, and you must be devoted to that over a whole life. And yet actually at 26, as soon as the law allows, a lot of these people stop studying Torah. So maybe it's not a whole lifetime thing. But I wanted to ask you just about the orientation of the Haredi community to the country, partly because, again, where I live here, there's lots of people who are either indifferent to the existence of a state of Israel or even hostile to it for deeply embedded religious reasons that they believe in some way it was not up for human beings to, preempt, usurp the will of God. It's up to God to bring the Jews back to the land of Israel, not human beings. Has that changed? I mean, we know that obviously for some groups they never believed that anyway, but mainstream Haredi thinking, what is its view of, its feeling about the state of Israel? Does it still regard it as something that is to be tolerated rather than supported, or is that shifting?
So I was born into this dilemma because my parents like really strictly Haredi, and my father, he didn't want to. The two of them made Aliyah from the United States before I was born, but my father was part of those communities. He came from Mansi, if it tells you something. He didn't want to become a citizen of Israel. He was like upset of the country. He said that he feels that the country is in fault of bringing so many people to getting secular and leaving the Torah way of living and things like that. My mother was the different side. She was coming from Bnei Akiva, and so I was like born into this conflict. And then I got married to a boy that was a son of a member of Knesset. And his father was serving the army and was serving the Etzel, and he was a member of Knesset. And then I had to decide if I stand up and sing a tikva when I was taking part in those ceremonies. It's a big dissonance in the Haredi community. In the community that I live in today, we all are very happy of having Israel as a country, and we are... no one here is against or talks like the things you described. No, I don't see this anymore around me, but I know it exists.
Rivka Ravitz, that was such an illuminating conversation, and we really thank you for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. So really good to speak with Rivka Ravitz. As we said, those conversations don't happen often, and I hope I conveyed it to her. I thought she was really candid and explaining exactly why this is a problem, and explaining that a big part of it is a fear, and she's used that word, that their own children will be less religious if they mix with other Israelis for a sustained period of time. She talked about people in her family coming back, even when they served in units with other Orthodox Jews, coming back no longer wearing a kippah, no longer observing the Sabbath. I thought that was very honest.
Yeah, and I thought that the part when she talks about meeting other mothers and having friends whose sons are serving and trying to explain to them and saying it's so hard. I realize that it's not easy to try and explain this. Look, Rivka Ravitz is like if there is something that is close to the sort of Ashkenazi ultra-orthodox royalty in this country or elite in this country, she's part of it. And she, I think, explains very candidly what their feelings are. And I like the fact that we have these conversations, not in a way that's adversarial, but in a way that listens to the other side and tries to understand the world from, as she called it, their mountain. So I'm really glad that we had this conversation this week, where it's incredibly important, I think, to take a deep dive into that issue. But we have awards, sir, so we have some more work to do here.
We do. I think the chutzpah award that you have spotted is rather choice, and so I think you should kick that off.
Surprise, surprise, Israeli does the chutzpah award. Okay, so this chutzpah award this week, I think New York Magazine deserves it, and I will explain. It's a story that really just is a bit amusing. So New York Magazine ran a story focusing on three Democratic lawmakers who have made an effort to sort of publicly back Israel. Of course, the piece is criticizing them for this stance. And they put the pictures of three of the lawmakers that they were referring to. But they switched Representative Richie Torres and put the picture of New York Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado. Now, they are two different men, completely. The only thing they have in common is that they are African Americans. And of course, Richie Torres did go to Twitter and slammed New York Magazine justifiably for doing that. He wrote, if New York Magazine is going to publish an anti-Israel hit piece, then at least do enough due diligence to get the photo right. You see this picture and you think to yourself, waiter, can I have a little bit of racism sprinkled atop of my anti-Zionism? Yes, usually it's better to get the pictures right, I think.
You know what? If it had been an outlet that was from the right, Fox News made this mistake, then they would not be that embarrassed by having made it, I don't think. In this case, but particularly an article that is all about how awful the conflict in Gaza is, and that is very much pitched at those people who hold extremely sort of progressive politics. It's among exactly those people that this is such a humongous no-no. It does, when it happens among media organizations, and it happens far more often than it should, people are rightly outraged by it. But the kind of people who are outraged by it are the kind of people who would have been cheering along that piece. So, other people could take the criticism. In this case, I think it would have really struck New York Magazine. They won't have been at all happy to have slipped up in that way. So a chutzpah award on its way to them. For Mensch, staying with sort of media, really, just because this was something that had a big impact on the British media, which was an interview on BBC Radio 4's flagship Today programme. That's the morning show that really is listened to by many, many millions of people. But it gave a very long segment to Ada Sagi, who is one of the better known hostages in that first wave because of that image of her. She's 76 years old, a grandmother who was captured and taken, barefoot on a motorbike from her kibbutz near Oz to Gaza. And that image of an elderly lady, clearly, just in her home, didn't even have shoes on, being snatched and taken to Gaza, was one of those images that really did go around the world. She was one of those who was released in that November exchange of hostages. And she gave, I think it was her first UK interview with Emma Barnett of the BBC. They gave it a long time, and more than I think has been given to one of those kind of conversations before. But the particular moment that really stayed with a lot of listeners, and definitely with me, was that Ada Sagi is one of those people, like quite a few of those people in those southern kibbutzim, who was a lifelong peace activist. She was an Arabic, she'd learned Arabic, she was teaching people Arabic. She was somebody who believed in coexistence. And Emma Barnett asked her, do you still believe in peace? And it was one of those questions that you just expect a sort of feel-good answer that closes an interview and everyone feels okay. And there was this pause, and she said, no. Sorry, she said. She knew that in a way people outside want to be told that it's all going to be okay. And she said, no, she just can't believe in peace anymore, which is heartbreaking to hear, but honest. But the sorry afterwards, as if somebody who's a lifelong member of the peace camp, she knows how disappointing it is for people to hear that. It prompted then the next day, Today program then hosted two parents who were also bereaved, who are part of the Bereaved Parents Forum, Rami Elchanan and Bassam Aramin, one Israeli Jewish, one Arab, who have also lost children, and they said why they still do believe in peace. The effect of the 2 days, just prompted by that one answer, is for people to have thought, in this country anyway, deeply about this question. But it began with the honesty about her extraordinary traumatic experience from Ada Sagi. So I think of Ada Sagi as a mensch of the week.
Definitely a heroine. When you think of what she said there, she said there's no such thing as people who are not involved. She said the people who held us were paid by Hamas to hold us. And I think that's an important thing to look at. When you look at what is happening in Gaza, we also know that the person who held Noah Argamani for a very long time was let's stretch that term, journalist. He was an Al Jazeera contributor. There is a question here, right, of the involvement. The Americans and a lot of the Israelis want to say there is a difference between Hamas and the general population. And of course, in any case, the general population should not be hurt as much as it can be possible in the circumstances of this war. But we need to also say there is a deep involvement of parts of the population in what is going on. Ada Sagi talked about that when she said that people were paid by Hamas to hold her for as long as they did. As you said, she was released in November. There are still 120 Israeli hostages held. It is 8.5 months, though the Wall Street Journal is saying that the estimation is that about 50 of them are alive. I really hope it's more than that. But in any case, I think it's very, very urgent that these people be released. Ada Sagi telling what she has been going through. She was there for 50 days. These people are now there for 5 times as longer than that. they need to get out.
Yeah. I mean, that point about the journalist, by the way, I know Al Jazeera have said he contributed one article, I think it was several years ago, but the point is he was published in English abroad, the Palestine Chronicle and other outlets, as Adesagi said, families being paid to do it. And she even talked about how much they were paid. She, as an Arabic speaker, she was able to overhear those conversations and be told what she was worth as a negotiating chip, as a hostage, and for the people holding her.
But the main point, as you said, is that they took these people who believed in peace and worked for it, and Hamas crushed them. That is what they wanted to achieve in this part of what they wanted to achieve in this terror attack.
So that, I think, is our awards. And
yeah,
also
look at us ending on a high note, as usual.
Well, no, it is a high note to admire the strength of someone like Adesagi and those other campaigners as well who are on the next day. I think that's more or less it for this episode. We are getting lots of very good responses from all of you all around the world, and we are grateful to them. Do continue spreading the word. There is
we're going over our mailbox, and we're going to relate to some of what we've been reading and hearing in the next couple of weeks. But we're really glad and happy for every response that we are getting. And we should say our thank yous to Gaia Glaser, Omer Primat, and Omri Barak. Jonathan's still with us next week.
Not just next week, by the way. I think the next couple of weeks. I think let's not draw out this goodbye. It's turning into one of those Jewish goodbyes. When there's any Jewish event, people are at the front door for an hour and a quarter saying goodbye. This is becoming a Jewish goodbye. We need to bring
the long Jewish goodbye.
It really
We're going to bring
is.
Elliot Gold next episode.
We'll see you then. Bye bye.